Good morning. Hope that your Wednesday's off to a good start. Mine is so far. In my outdoor office, and it's just a beautiful day. Coffee with the preacher. This time the coffee's in my Bigfoot Sasquatch mug. I'm glad you're taking a few minutes to spend with me on a Wednesday morning. A topic for today is going to be one that I picked up from a YouTube comment a couple of weeks ago. As you know, over the last, month or more, I've been talking about religious groups that are they're heterodox. I'm not using the term cult for any of them, but they're out of the mainstream, if you will. So I mentioned the Jehovah's Witnesses, Church of Christ Science, Mormons, Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, in other words, the Way International, Unitarian Universalists, and the Unification Church. And like I said, in one of the comments on one of these on YouTube a couple of weeks ago, somebody asked about the Amish, the Mennonites. And so I want to refer to them this morning. So 2 or 3 years ago, I did a series of these talking about the various denominations, the various Christian denominations. And we know so many of them. You ride down the road and you see the churches. There's the Roman Catholic Church, and then there's a Baptist church, and another kind of Baptist church, and a Presbyterian church, and a Lutheran church, and all the rest. And within these, there are multiple different, there are all different kinds of Baptist churches, multiple different kinds of Presbyterian, Methodist, Lutheran churches. And I took a good while talking about those. And today I'm going to be talking about the Amish and the Mennonites. And these belong really more with that earlier series. The Amish and the Mennonites, they are not at all heterodox in what they believe. Their beliefs are, as I understand them, are fully in line with small o Orthodox Christianity, traditional Christianity. Where there's a difference is in the practice. They practice their faith differently. They live it differently than I do. But the core of their beliefs are the same. And that is what sets them apart from these groups that I've mentioned before. With them, there's something that is different in the belief system. With the Amish and the Mennonites, the belief system is the same, but how they live it out is different. So, who are these two denominations? And I'll call them denominations. Who are they? Where do they come from? For that, we have to go back. We have to take a history lesson. In a former life, I studied history. And then I got some church history in seminary, so I hope I won't bore you too much. The origins of the Amish and Mennonite churches go back to the Protestant Reformation. That began, the traditional date given for starting that is 1517, but it didn't exactly happen that one year. And they came out of a broader group in the Reformation known as Anabaptists. So the Reformation, you've got the two dominant strains of the Reformation are the Lutherans and the Calvinists. Calvin is sometimes called the Reformed. So you've got these two dominant strains of the Reformation, and of course they are breaking away from the Roman Catholic Church. But some few years after Luther began, there was a more radical strain of the Reformation that began, and they were known as the Anabaptists. The Anabaptists differed a lot from what are called the magisterial reformers, meaning Calvin and Luther. They differed a lot in how the faith is supposed to be lived out. And the most famous thing for them was that they did not believe in infant baptism, and that anyone who'd been baptized as an infant should be rebaptized, hence the term Anabaptist. But it's not just not doing infant baptism. They, their view of the relationship between church and state was very different. The Anabaptists believed that the church should really have nothing to do with the state, that the state should have nothing to do with the church. And at that time, Lutherans and the Reform branch, they didn't have much trouble seeing blurred lines between church and state. And of course, the Roman Catholics didn't either. But the Anabaptists wanted a hard line between church and state. They were suspicious of state power and didn't want to have much to do with the state. Pardon me while the truck goes by. So the Anabaptists tended to set up their own communities and just do their own thing and not want to have anything to do with the broader state. They were also very pacifist. And they were devoutly pacifist. So they were devoutly pacifist. They set up their own communities. They don't want to have anything to do with the broader state, or the state to have anything to do with them, and they rebaptize people. That went over very well in the 1500s. And about the only thing that Lutherans, the Calvinists, and the Catholics could agree on is that they all hated the Anabaptists. They all hated the Anabaptists, and they took equal joy and pleasure in persecuting them, which is, it's a stain on the faith that branches of the faith persecuted each other, but it happened. One of the early Anabaptist leaders was a man named Menno Simons, or Simons. I've seen it spelled both ways. Menno Simons or Simons, and he led a group of the Anabaptists, and his followers became known as Mennonites before his first name, Menno. And a few years later, one of Menno's followers, Jakob Amann, in Switzerland, sort of broke away again, and his followers became known as the Amish for his last name. So Menno Simons, his followers became known as Mennonites, and a generation or two after Menno Simons, we have Jakob Amann in Switzerland, and his followers became known as the Amish. So these two groups are their cousins in the faith, if you will. So here in the U.S., the Amish right now, and I'm going to mention them first, the Amish right now are primarily in Pennsylvania, with some also in Ohio. The Amish are very distinctive for really not wanting to have any modern appliances, any modern conveniences. They don't do really anything with the broader outside world. They're suspicious of the broader outside world. They even, like, within their own families, within their own churches, they are likely as not to speak a dialect of Dutch rather than to speak English. The Amish, they live in homes without electricity, without appliances. That's how they live. It's a different way of living the faith. Their dress is very modest, very plain. It's a pretty patriarchal society. It is a tight-knit community, very tight-knit community. They don't intermarry with other people. Like a good Amish girl is not going to marry even a Mennonite boy unless he joins the Amish faith. The Amish are they are staunchly pacifist, as by tradition even today they're staunchly pacifist. And someone who is Amish will not join the military for any purpose at all. That's who they are. The Amish, interestingly, they don't send their kids to public schools. They educate their own. They don't have separate buildings for worship. They worship rotating around in various people's homes. And normally it's every other week. They're divided into districts, and each church in each district worships every other week, rotating from house to house. And everybody gathers in that one house. The worship service is about 3 hours long. It's a long service. They sing, but their singing style is much different. Their songs tend to be done in unison rather than harmony, and their songs are very, very slow. Like a hymn in most churches might be 3 or 4 minutes. A hymn in an Amish church might be 12 or 15 minutes, done in unison rather than in 3 or 4 part harmony. And I have one person who, like a pre-preacher, who speaks for about a half an hour, and then the main sermon is going to be over an hour. And apparently, from what I understand, they sort of decide that morning who's going to do the pre-sermon, who's going to do the main sermon. And like as a preacher, someone who preaches only twice a week, nearly every Sunday of the year, I can't imagine that. But again, it's a different way of living the faith. The Amish are very well known for traditional crafts, traditional furniture, handiwork, woodworking, baking, traditional crafts. And really there's some of that they share with their Mennonite cousins as well. The Amish are well known for their tradition of a barn raising. And barn raising is a beautiful thing if you think about it, what is actually going on there in the way of community. Like this family over here, they need a barn. Their barn is rotten, and the whole community gathers to tear down the old one, and 12 or 15 men will go in together to saw the lumber and build the barn. And the barn raising becomes a community event, complete with covered dish meals and all the rest. It's a great picture of community. So the Mennonites are a cousin, if you will, to the Amish. A significant difference between the Mennonites and the Amish right now is that there is a broad range of Mennonites. There is a denomination, the Mennonite Church USA, I think that's what it's called, or Mennonite Churches USA, which is, in terms of practice, not that different from any other denomination, except that they are still devoutly pacifist. But in terms of how they practice their faith, they're not that different. But there is a broad continuum of Mennonites. Some who are, in terms of how they live and practice, aren't that far removed from the Amish. In general though, you'll recognize Mennonites if you see them. You can recognize them by how they're dressed. I was in a museum up at the beach in Hatteras, North Carolina. In fact, the Graveyard of the Atlantic Museum. I'll give a shout out to them. It's a great museum if you're up in that area. And while I was in there, I saw a Mennonite family. And the father, and I guess it was his son, in dark slacks and long sleeve, can't remember what color shirt, long sleeve shirt buttoned all the way up. And the wife and daughter, I assume, in matching starched dresses with white caps, head coverings. That's typical Mennonite. An Amish family probably would not go into the museum. The Mennonites, even the more conservative ones, will interact with society, but they'll be dressed differently. A Mennonite, even the more conservative one, will use driving a car. It might not be a flashy car, but they'll use a car. Another time that we were at the Outer Banks, saw a Mennonite. Might have been a couple of families get out of a van at the hotel where we were staying. We were staying in this motel, and there's a van with probably 2 families of Mennonites. An Amish family would not use the van, but you could tell they're Mennonites by their dress. They're happy using the van, using that part of modern technology, whereas an Amish family would not be. In general, the Mennonites, even the more conservative, more traditional ones, are more open to outsiders. The Amish aren't going to mix as much with the outside world and are more distrusting of the outside world. The Mennonites will mix more with the outside world, and they're more welcoming to others who would want to come in. The difference between the Mennonites and the Amish is, to a large extent, a difference in degree. The Amish are very conservative, and when I say conservative, I don't mean don't think politically conservative. I think classical conservative. They're very traditional, very conservative in how they dress, and everything about their lifestyle. If you're in Pennsylvania, in the Amish country, they ride down the road with a horse and buggy. And that's, you're in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, that's the way they roll, so to speak. Mennonites, even most Mennonites, they may look outwardly like Amish, the more traditional conservative Mennonites would, but they're not going to be as distrustful of the outside world, and they're going to be more willing to interact with the outside world. They'll drive a car and have modern appliances, etc., etc. A Mennonite church service will be more open than an Amish church service. A Mennonite will marry outside of the faith. Most of them would. I think an Amish will not. Young Amish boy will not marry a girl from a Baptist church or even a Mennonite church. As the way they roll. That's okay. So, in general, the Amish and the Mennonites, and with the caveat that there is a broad range of Mennonites. That is a very broad category. They're totally orthodox in their faith. They're totally orthodox in their faith. We have the Bible, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, virgin birth, resurrection, all of this, Jesus' atoning death, these core elements of our faith, they believe as well. There's no difference there. The difference with the Amish and the Mennonites isn't the core of their faith, but how they live it out. And so I probably would agree with most of what an Amish or a Mennonite family believes theologically. Not everything, but I don't agree with about everything with pretty much anybody. That's okay. I would agree with most everything theologically that an Amish family believes, I suspect, but we live our faiths differently, and I have to respect that. It's not the way I see the faith as being lived out, but that's okay. I'm in no position to judge them, but anyway, I hope this has been helpful for you, and that you have a great rest of your day. And after I get done here, I'm going to be wheels up heading to Greenville, North Carolina, for our annual conference of the United Methodist Church, my little corner of the kingdom. So with that, have a great rest of your day.